In a small, bustling town, two men lived vastly different lives. One was John, the son of a wealthy merchant, and the other was Mark, a struggling laborer. Their paths rarely crossed, though they lived not far from each other, for the world they inhabited could not have been more different. John's world was one of opulence, luxury, and opportunity. He lived in a sprawling estate on the hill, with servants attending to his every need. From a young age, he had everything: education, comfort, and a life free of want. His father had built a business empire, and John, in his late 20s, was now set to take over. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on him, though he never spoke of it. He appeared confident, though in truth, he often wondered if he was capable of filling his father's shoes. Mark, on the other hand, lived in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. His world was one of struggle and perseverance. He woke up every morning before dawn and worked late into the evening as a laborer at the docks. He had no formal education, but was wise in the ways of survival. Every penny he earned went towards feeding his family, and though he toiled endlessly, it seemed he could never rise above his situation. One cold winter evening, John was driving his carriage home from a late meeting in the town center when it suddenly broke down on a deserted road. As the wind picked up and snow began to fall, he cursed under his breath, trying to fix the problem but failing miserably. Frustration and panic started to creep in. He had never faced this kind of challenge before. His problems were usually solved with money or influence. But out here, on a dark, snowy road, neither could help him. As fate would have it, Mark was walking home from a long day's work and saw John struggling by the side of the road. Mark recognized him instantly. Everyone in town knew John, the rich merchant's son. He hesitated for a moment. He had nothing in common with John, no reason to stop and help. But then, remembering his father's words, "Help others when you can, not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do," he approached John. "Need a hand?" Mark asked, his voice warm despite the biting cold. John, startled and slightly embarrassed, nodded. "Yes, the carriage just broke down, and I'm not sure what to do. I can pay you if you can help." Mark shook his head. "No need for that. Let's see what the problem is." With experienced hands, Mark quickly diagnosed the issue: a broken axle. "This isn't something that can be fixed quickly. You're too far from town to walk, and the weather's getting worse. You'll freeze out here if you stay." John, shivering, realized Mark was right. "What should I do?" Mark thought for a moment. "You can come back to my place for the night. It's not much, but it's warm. We'll figure something out in the morning." John hesitated. He had never been inside a home like Mark's before, but he had no other options. "All right," he agreed, and they set off towards Mark's humble dwelling. When they arrived, John was struck by the stark contrast between his own life and Mark's. The house was small, barely held together, but it was filled with warmth. Mark's wife greeted them with a smile, and though there was little food, they shared what they had with their unexpected guest. John, who had dined in the finest restaurants and enjoyed the most exquisite meals, was touched by the simplicity and generosity of the meal. That night, as they sat by the fire, John asked Mark, "How do you do it? How do you manage to stay hopeful when life seems so hard?" Mark leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before answering. "It's not easy. Some days I feel like giving up. But I have a family that depends on me, and I've learned that happiness doesn't come from what you have. It comes from knowing that you've done your best, that you've lived honestly, and that you've helped others along the way." John listened intently, feeling something shift inside him. In his world, success was measured by wealth, status, and power. But here, in this tiny, humble home, Mark had shown him a different way to look at life, a way that was grounded in kindness, resilience, and purpose. The next morning, Mark helped John get in touch with a mechanic who could fix the carriage. Before John left, he pulled out a pouch of gold coins, offering them to Mark as thanks. Mark smiled but shook his head. "I didn't help you for money. Just remember, no matter how much you have, what matters is what you do with it." John nodded, understanding for the first time the depth of Mark's words. As the days passed, John couldn't stop thinking about the man who had shown him such kindness. He realized how sheltered his life had been, how disconnected he was from the struggles of those less fortunate. Determined to change, he started visiting the poorer areas of town, speaking with the people, listening to their stories. Slowly, he began to see the world not through the lens of wealth, but through the eyes of compassion. John used his influence and resources to set up programs that provided jobs for those in need, fair wages for laborers, and education for the children who couldn't afford it. He worked side by side with people like Mark, learning more from them than he had ever learned in the halls of privilege. Years passed, and John's business thrived, not just because of profits, but because it had become a symbol of hope in the community. He had found a deeper purpose beyond the wealth he had been born into. Mark too continued his hard work, but life became a little easier, knowing that there were now opportunities for his children that he never had. One day, John visited Mark's house again, not as a stranger in need, but as a friend. They sat by the fire, just as they had years before, sharing stories of their journeys. "Thank you," John said quietly, "for showing me what really matters." Mark smiled. "You didn't need me to show you. You just needed to look." And so, in that small town, the rich man and the poor man discovered that wealth is not measured by what one owns, but by the good one does and the lives one touches along the way.